first thing I like to say is free Malachi Kobina York. We have so few true heroes and sheroes amongst us that we should support, protect, defend, and stand up for those willing to stand up for us. I want to start out by giving thanks to the guardians, our ancestors, and all the forces that enable me to do this. I'm not the first to do this, obviously, but just a humble student who is, metaphorically speaking, a player that is just carrying the ball a few more yards. I would like to thank all of the great men and women, seen and unseen, that have contributed to this work, and all those who have passed on, who watch us and send us their help and love from on high. I felt it necessary to put this work together because it is needed, and our people, Nubian African people the world over, are being targeted on many different fronts. Our people are dying out here, from the streets to the hospitals to the prisons, and we are out of our minds, literally, and in someone else's mind, which creates physically adverse conditions for us. People are encountering situations in which outmoded methods of thinking, inclusive of religion and mainstream media-induced thinking, cannot solve. So there must be a conscious effort on our part to counteract this concentrated agenda against our people. Though we aren't the only ones affected by the ills of society, but we have throughout the last few hundred years of his story, HISSTORY, the dumping ground for the refuse of white, Western, Caucasian society, physically, socially, economically, and so on. Case in point, in 1964, two-thirds of all people incarcerated in the United States in jails and prisons on the local, state, and federal level were white. Only one-third were people of color. By 1994, two-thirds of all people incarcerated were people of color, mostly African-American and Latino. The rate of African-American crime barely changed in that past 25 years. What did change was an increase in law enforcement and police dollars in black neighborhoods. 60% of all violent crime committed in America to this day is committed by Caucasians. Whites are only 23% of the people incarcerated for violent crimes. 74% of all illegal drug users are white. 10% of the people incarcerated for drug offenses are white. Blacks are 14% of all drug users, yet 74% of those locked up for drug offenses. Latinos are 10% of all drug users and 15% of those incarcerated. Together, Latinos and blacks make up about 24% of all drug users, but are 90% of people incarcerated for drug-related offenses. All of these statistics are borrowed from a Caucasian, out of the mouth of a Caucasian, a man by the name of Tim Wise. You all look him up, you get a chance. This is just one example. So I present to you this one of 9-part lecture series entitled The Blackpages Mixtape Volume 1. I'm not selling these for profit, but to get the information out. Please bootleg this and spread this throughout your communities. And pretty much that's my intro to this. And the last thing I like to say before I end this intro is free Malachi Kobina York. Alright, the first thing that I would like to be very brief in addressing is modern religions. I will not spend a lot of time on this because there are volumes upon volumes of research available on this if one would just take the blinders off and do the research. I choose to address this first because this is a cancer affecting the minds of our people. We will never come to the realization of who we really are as African people under this false state of mind. Firstly, we must all agree on the fact that we're African people, and originally we didn't subscribe to the 3 monotheistic religions. We had our own culture, our own way of life, our own way of thinking, which birthed all other cultures. Many of us are not familiar with these concepts, but it is no doubt that they existed. Africans were converted to these religions. Other facts, such as blacks being the indigenous people of the planet Earth, and I say that again, the indigenous people of the planet Earth, meaning the first people on the face of the planet Earth, and we will touch on this in later volumes on this series. Now, the heart of the lie of the monotheistic religions would be the book of Genesis, because all of your 3 monotheistic religions have this in common. Let's take a look at this briefly. The first 5 books of the Bible and the Torah are the books of Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Deuteronomy, and Numbers. Exodus is Moses' alleged life and times in Egypt. And I do say alleged life and times, supposed life and times in Egypt. Leviticus and Deuteronomy are the 613 commandments turned to the 10 commandments, because 6 plus 1 plus 3 is 10. These 3 books are allegedly received by Moses. Numbers was received by Joshua, and it was a numbering of the people, supposedly. So where did the book of Genesis come from? And keep in mind, Moses is a descendant of Abraham. They received Genesis during their bondage in Babylon up under Nebuchadnezzar. So there's no such thing as a Hebrew creation story. And I'll repeat that again. There's no such thing as a Hebrew creation story. In fact, the linguist Dr. York informs us that the word Hebrew is derived from an action, ivrit, meaning to cross over. Abraham was a Chaldean, and when he crossed over the Tigris-Euphrates River, he became ivrit, a Hebrew, one who crosses over. The Hebrew creation story is thus a Babylonian creation story, and thus a Sumerian creation story, rendering all of the we's and us's in Genesis literally gods, plural. Just as the Sumerians had gods, plural. Elo is singular. Elo, just like Allah. Elo is in Allah, Arabic and Hebrew are related. Elohim, Elohim, is dual, and Elohim is 3 or more. And the so-called Hebrews don't have trinities. These gods were physical beings, just as the sons of God physically came in unto the daughters of man, and they physically bore them physical children. Same thing with the Sumerian gods. They were physical gods that did and built physical things. In the book, Body Parts of God, put out by the United Nuwaupians Worldwide, it goes into reason that if God walked in the cool of the day, then God had legs, which means he had bones, which means he had blood, which is made in the bone marrow, which means he had a heart to pump this blood, oxygenated and deoxygenated blood through the body. He had lungs, thus he had to breathe. He had a need to breathe. He had a skeleton inclusive of a spinal cord, which is connected to the brain. Even saying "let there be light" renders God to have a need to breathe, because you can't say anything without air or speak without the brocamotor speech area in the frontal lobe of your physical brain. So the Sumerian story becomes the key to understanding the book of Genesis and really all of your monotheistic religions. So to take it one step further, when these different names of God are mentioned in the Bible, in many cases they aren't talking about one God. They're talking about many different deities. For example, 1 Chronicles 21:1, Satan influences David to hold a census. The census is taken, and God is angry for an unknown reason. Perhaps God doesn't want humans to be aware of the strength of the army. God then offers David his choice of one of 3 punishments: a 3-year famine, 3 months of fleeing before his enemy's armies, or a plague throughout Israel. David selects the plague, and God kills 70,000 men and presumably a similar number of women and tens of thousands of children. Okay? In 2 Samuel chapter 24, the identical event is described. However, this time the text states that God influences David to hold the census. Even though God had incited David to enumerate the men of Israel and Judea, he was still angry that it was done and punished the Israelites with a plague. So this same identical event that happens in 2 different chapters in the Bible, one time it's Satan that does it, and one time it's God that does it. Certain details are left out and inserted, but it's obviously the same event. Okay? The Nephilim of Genesis are derived from the Anunnaki story, because like I said, there is no Hebrew creation story. It is a Sumerian creation story. And to make reference of this, that some of this information is leaking out after a certain author has been putting this information out for about 40 years now. The TV show Ancient Aliens just scratches the surface. Of course, they have to add their own little flavor into it, but this show Ancient Aliens, it goes into the same concept that I'm talking about. So I'm not the first person to make mention of this for all the people who saying, well, that guy is crazy. The Anunnaki are the same beings as your Netiru in Egypt, just named after a different event for a different period of time. We know the time described in Genesis to be an event because scientifically the sun predates the earth. The earth is just starts off as just a ball of gas coming from the planet, and it has the cool for you to have a solid ground to walk on and liquid water to drink and air to breathe. The earth starts off similar to how the planet Jupiter is, a ball of gas. This is explained in the actual fact series by Dr. York called Existence, How and Why. In these Sumerian stories, we find the missing pieces to our plagiarized Bible myths. If Cain and Abel, Adam and Eve, are the only beings on the planet, then how did Cain get a wife? Because in the real story of Cain and Abel had sisters, and there were whole tribes of other people on the planet, and had been for thousands of years before Adam and Eve. Who built the land of Nod? What language did they speak? Because it takes generation upon generation upon generation to arrive at a language. These are the questions that are clearly explained in the original books they got Genesis from, the Sumerian creation story that I was telling you about earlier, namely the Enuma Elish, the Atrahasis, the Gilgamesh epics, etc. And these are just the Sumerian texts. As we know, Egypt, or what they are calling Egypt, predates Sumer. The account being described in Genesis is talking about a specific event that happened in the earth's history, according to the detailed cuneiform tablets that predate the Bible by thousands of years. It's an event of 450,000 years ago, lasting up until 49,000 years ago, with the creation of what biblical mythology refers to as Adam, but we know as Geb, G-E-B, in ancient Tamaray or Egypt, or as Zechariah Sitchin refers to it as Kish, or more accurately still, Cush. Religion locks people into a fictitious time zone of 6,000 years, because 6,000 years is the span of biblical time, and African people's history spans millions of years on this planet. Kenyapithecis, or Lucy, which was founded in Ethiopia, dates back 2 million years. Truthfully speaking, the Caucasian has only been around for 6,000 years in any reasonable numbers. And as John Henry Clark so eloquently pointed it out before, prior to 1000 BC, there was no nation of Caucasians on the planet Earth, i.e. Greece, which, if that is explored, were actually warring city-states. We, the Egyptians, built Athens. Athens as in Atun. Atun as in Akhenaten. Atumre, Amunre was a triad in Egypt. This city gave these nomadic people of this region something to strive toward, and Greece was formed. Prior to that, they were cave dwellers. According to the book Wonderful Ethiopians of the Ancient Kushite Empire by Drusilla Dungy Houston, there's no trace of a Stone Age in Africa, but there is a 48,000-year-old gold mine in South Africa. The Iron Age started in Africa. Other than Genesis, the other 4 books, namely Exodus, Leviticus, Deuteronomy, and Numbers, are fictitious history derived from elements of Egypto-Nubian history. The Exodus of Egypt was really the expulsion of the Hyksos pharaohs from Egypt. Your Hebrews are your Hibiru, Hibiru, desert dwellers in Egyptian literature, a group of vagabonds, thieves, mercenaries, and criminals with no homeland. And your Israelites are your Shasu, S-H-A-S-U, also called in Egypt Tamahu, walking filth, because they were a diseased kind of mankind. Just like when the Native Americans encountered them and said that no disease was present until the white man came. The Egyptians allowed them to come in and graze their cattle and feed themselves, and they merged in and tried to overtake them and absorb their culture, just like the Europeans did with the colonization of Africa. And you have your Afrikaners, North Americans, people walking around with a great-great-granddaddy who's 10% Indian or something, saying I'm a Cherokee, and in Australia where they've nearly eradicated your Aboriginal population. These are the same genetic stock that overthrew the Dravidian people in India and imposed the caste system on them, making the darker-skinned creators of civilization the slaves. They are derived from your Aryan, Iran, moved to the Caucasus Mountains where they bred horses, a genetically created albino race of people. Albinoism is a rarity in nature. It takes generations upon generations just to breed one. To breed a race of albino people would not happen naturally, but would take a concentrated effort over a number of generations. Research Theosophy, Madame Blavatsky, the Thule Society, the book called The Secret Doctrine, and the concept of eugenics. So your Exodus story was nothing but a remnant of their adaptation to an alien culture. That is why when you read the book, Jesus has hair of wool and feet of brass, and Noah is perfect in his generations, meaning perfect in his genes, meaning the darker the skin, the curlier the hair, the stronger the genes. And you know, when a little baby is born, at first his hair lays down, then after a couple of days when it strengthens up, it starts to curl up. His son was named Ham, from Ham, Kham, meaning burnt black. Ham, Kemet, Egypt. According to the story, due to the fact that his mate and his son's mates don't have perfect gene, Ham gives birth to the albino Canaan, whose original name was Labana, meaning milky white. Babies are given their name on the 8th day of their birth. The book talks about black people because the stories were taken from black people. Just like, according to the Golden Age of the Moors, by Ivan van Sertima, many of the great literary works of Europe written by Cervantes and Shakespeare, to name a few, made reference to black people because they were heavily influenced by the Moorish presence there. But as far as your flood story, Dr. Malachi Komeni York explains in the actual fact book series that in Egypt, the pharaoh that was said to have lived through a great flood was Sin-Nefer-Re, or as they call it for your research purposes, Sneferu. This is the closest historical person that can actually be documented to have actually existed in this time. His son Khufu, given credit by Caucasians but not actually building the Great Pyramid, his grandson Khafre, and his great-grandson Menkaure are credited for your 3 pyramids of Giza. Just like there were 3 wise men, just like the pyramids are said to have been built in the 4th dynasty, just like Judah is Jacob and Leah's 4th child, just like Leo is the 4th zodiac sign, just like Jesus, Jehovah Zeus, is said to be the Lion of Judah. The birth of Christ is not the birth of a person, but the changing of an age, from the age of Pisces, marked by the star in the east. How convenient. Every star rises in the east. All celestial bodies travel from east to west because the earth spins in the opposite direction. They are talking about heliacal risings of stars. That means a star that rises with the sun. The Leo star constellation is what the biblical wise men would have been charting. It rises to mark the dawning of a new age. This has nothing to do with the birth of a fictitious biblical character, Jesus Christ. See the Pisonian conspiracy. Joseph Flavius Piso authored the New Testament. December 25th is a significant date because it is the winter solstice. 12 tribes, 12 disciples, 12 zodiac signs from Dendera since ancient times. Dr. Malachi Komeni York, he informs us in the actual fact series that the tribe of Reuben correlates to the constellation Taurus. Simon correlates to the constellation Gemini. Levi correlates to the constellation Cancer. Judah correlates to Leo. Zebulon correlates to Virgo. Issachar correlates to Libra. Dan correlates to Scorpio. Gad correlates to Sagittarius. Asher correlates to Capricorn. Naphtali correlates to Aquarius. Joseph correlates to Pisces. And Benjamin correlates to Aries. What is archaeoastronomy? The definition given by Wikipedia is archaeoastronomy, also spelled archaeoastronomy, ARCHEOASTRONOMY, is the study of how peoples in the past have understood the phenomena in the skies, how they use phenomena in the skies, and what role the sky played in their cultures. Most of your ancient myths and stories tied into archaeoastronomy. The story about Jesus, biblical, Hebraic, and Islamic mythology are not exempt from this. This is comparable to when the Olympian gods overthrew the Titans. The Titans were derived from African gods. The Olympians were derived from Caucasian gods, establishing a new age. See the riddle of the Sphinx. This just further shows how no one really knows what year it is, and the calendar here has been distorted because it is based on the birth of a fictitious person instead of astrological events like it was in ancient times. Time is so vast that they use the precession of the equinox to measure it. That's another conversation for another time. We fast forward to the establishment of Christianity, and I encourage everyone interested in this subject to seek out Degree of Christism and Degree of Mohammedanism by Dr. Malachi Kobina York, as well as, if you can, YouTube Dr. Phil Valentine's lecture on Vampires of Consciousness. He breaks down the ins and outs of Christianity and the origin of it. Again, there are volume after volume of information on this subject. I just want to touch on it briefly as it pertains to the early Christian fathers. Now, to fully appreciate what our ancestors, the ancient Cushites, gave the world, you will have to tune into the next volume of this 9-part mixtape series called The Blackpages, Volume 2, The Reality of a Black Planet. That talks about Mother Ethiopia, also known as Nuwaupian, and what she gave to her children, namely Egypt, Sumer, India, Chaldea, and Greece, which was everything, and how our blood ancestors were understood to be the gods of old. And I'm going to say that again, how our physical, walking, talking blood ancestors were understood to be the black deities of the olden age, referred to as the old race. Stay tuned. But this mighty race taught the world about sciences, medicine, judicial systems, metallurgy, philosophy, religion, and how as much as people love to talk about the Illuminati, this was the original Illuminati, who were the civilizers of the planet, not to be confused with the Bavarian Illuminati founded by Adam Weishaupt in 1776. These wise Cushites, who were your original Masons, who introduced the idea of a secret society to the planet, they set up what were known as mystery schools all over the planet, where true knowledge was taught, knowledge that is still used today, the knowledge that Western society would like for you to be whitewashed into believing that Caucasians came up with. It was actually passed on to them by African Cushites. Not to mention records of ancient history that the oldest race on the planet, that Cushite Ethiopian, kept and made available for their children. So all throughout Rome during the time of Constantine, who was a Roman emperor who legalized Christianity in 325 AD, there were mystery schools that were actual schools. To oversimplify a long story, to perpetuate the myth of Christianity, Constantine and the early church fathers murdered the initiates of the mystery schools who refused to accept Christianity. Constantine put laws in place banning any other worship. Churches sprang up while temples, which again were actual schools of the mysteries of high sciences, were actually burnt down and replaced with these churches. Books of true knowledge and true history, non-Christian ideas and information were destroyed. Constantine was one of the first to pervade independent thought. And just like it was said earlier in this lecture, the books that the Bible stories were taken from predate the Bible by thousands of years. Those who studied in the mystery schools knew Christianity was fictitious because they were all too familiar with the stories that they got them from. Case in point, Google the similarities between Krishna, Horus, and Jesus. Also, Google the 13 crucified saviors. The Christian fathers burnt these words to perpetuate the myth of Christianity. These are the people that will have you believe that the earth is flat. Yet the Cushites calculated the precession of the equinox and built pyramids. They knew the circumference of the planet. Early Christian fathers were known liars and forgerers who feared too much exposure being laid on the facts behind Christianity. Jesus, Paul, Peter, Mark, Matthew, John, etc. cannot be proven to have ever existed. No historical person who actually can be confirmed to have really existed can confirm the existence of the so-called world-famous ministry of Jesus. The actual documented history of that time is inconsistent with the account given by the four synoptic gospels, which were hand-picked because they correlated with each other. If anybody ever wondered why there are 4 books in the Bible that tell the exact same story, it's because they intended it for it to be that way. These books were written at least 100 to 150 years after the supposed crucifixion. So from 1 to 100 AD, there was no record whatsoever of a Jesus Christ. Circumstances of Jesus' crucifixion directly conflict Jewish customs and Roman law. The people who compiled this story had no knowledge of the history of that time. Of all of the historians who lived during the supposed time of Jesus Christ, no one writes anything about him other than 2 authors. In the time the Jews were under Roman jurisdiction, they had no power to hold a trial. To try Jesus, though, the Bible says they tried him. No trial would have taken place after sundown, after the Garden of Gethsemane. The Mishnah, which is a Jewish book of law, is explanations for the Torah states that capital trials are commenced and concluded in the daytime. Only Romans had the power to execute for capital offenses, and basically all jurisdiction over capital offenses, period. Jewish law wasn't recognized by Rome, and a man couldn't have been executed for a violation of Jewish law by a Roman government. Jews judged him, then sent him to Pilate. Jesus represented himself in the trial, but by Jewish law, a man cannot represent himself. The judge must be impartial in the trial, yet in the Gospels, the judge tries to get Jesus to admit to the crime. Under Jewish law, blasphemy is not punishable by death, but we see in Matthew 26:65 that was the crime that Jesus was tried for. In this time in Rome, no man was condemned without a trial. Look up Jus Civitatis, Jus space Civitas. It was a Roman law stating that no Roman citizen or freeborn would be crucified. Not to mention crucifixion was unknown by the Jews. There are 4 capital punishments of the Jews: stoning, burning, beheading, and strangling. It was this destruction of the mystery schools and the onset of blind faith that flung Europe into the Dark Ages. Christians had a high illiteracy rate in the Middle Ages until the Moors from North Africa came and built the first universities in Europe, thus bringing the Europeans out of the Dark Ages. Ivan van Sertima writes in his book, Golden Age of the Moors, and I quote, "At the time when the most insignificant provinces of Moorish Spain contained libraries running into thousands of volumes, the cathedrals, monasteries, and palaces of Lyon under Christian rule numbered books only by the dozen. This paltry number of texts the Christians did possess were almost all devotional or liturgical. Though this did not last, later in his book, Van Sertima writes, this created a tunnel vision that would later lead to the burning of African and Arab books sparked by religious hatred and bigotry, but also racism. They viewed the technological advances of the Moors, inclusive of the number system and mathematics, as works of the devil, and wanted to erase from history all memory of the Moors. In conclusion, this is an oversimplification of the facts surrounding the origin of this mental sickness that makes one ignorant of facts. Islam is not exempt from this, because we must not forget that Islam is but a continuation of Christianity, all of which have done great harm to the minds of our people. Stay tuned for the next installment of the Blackpages Mixtape Volume 2, entitled Reality of a Black Planet, where we will dispel the myths of blacks being savages from the jungle with bones in our noses and reveal the fact that the African is the indigenous race of the planet Earth and the civilizer of the planet. Stay tuned.